Welcome to Old Testament History, Chapter 3, Session 16, the Book of Judges, Part 1. The promises of God had come to pass. The book of Joshua documented how the people of Israel, seasoned and hardened by the 40 years in the wilderness and compliant to the law of Moses and leadership of Joshua, had crossed the Jordan and taken a large portion of the promised land. Would they continue to stay faithful? Would they continue to obey God? They certainly had seen what had happened to those who did not do so. They certainly were in the big leagues spiritually, and there, like in the big leagues today, error rarely goes without being taken advantage of by the opponent. But now, in the book of Judges, we're going to see human nature and human frailty on display, as well as God's mercy. We're going to see what happens when no one rises up to lead, and what happens when they do. I'm sure that God called people to rise up after Joshua, but for some reason, few fully dedicated themselves and accepted God's invitations and gained the prominence to lead them like Moses and Joshua had. Maybe it was because they were tired of war and fighting. Maybe it was because they now had land and houses, and their goals had changed from community and glory to God to individuality issues like farming their land or embellishing their houses or building their families for posterity. But whatever it was, bit by bit, they declined from being the virulent and obedient and invincible people that they were when they first crossed the Jordan. We need to learn from their mistakes, because we too are in a society in decline, who were very God-centered when our nation began, and who also were unified when we won World War II, but now we are choking on our own affluence. As a country, no longer lean and mean, but fat and non-committal. No longer one, but divided by politics. No longer devout to God, but doing that which is right in our own eyes, and no longer moral, but flirting with hedonism. This book of Judges is both a lesson and a prophecy, for what happened to them could happen to us. But that is what the study of history is for, isn't it? We don't make the same mistakes. So, Judges chapter 1, verse 1. Let's begin there. Judges chapter 1, verse 1. Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first, to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hand. That's speaking of Judah as a tribe. And Judah said to Simeon, his brother, Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with thee into your lot. So Simeon went with him. So they both allied and helped each other in their territories to mop up, like I talked about last week. And Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they slew of them in Bezek 10,000 men. They found a guy named Adonbezek in Bezek, and they fought against him, and they slew the Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adonbezek fled, and they pursued after him and caught him, and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. And Adonbezek said, 70 kings, having their thumbs and their big toes cut off, gathered their meat under my table. As I have done, so God hath repaid me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. So apparently this guy, Adonbezek, had a technique to subdue people under him, and he cut off their thumbs and their big toes. Wow. Because without thumbs, it's difficult to grasp things, especially weapons. So it was thought to be a way of rendering foes incapable of fighting back. And the big toe is important for balance, and running and walking. Now, without them, people can still manage, but they can't run as fast, etc. So, again, it was thought of a way of hampering one's opponents. And so in this case, Adonbezek got done to him what he had done to others. Judges chapter 1, verse 8. Now the children of Judah had fought against Jerusalem, and had taken it and smitten it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the mountain, and in the south, and in the valley. And Judah went against the Canaanites that dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron before was Kirjath Abra, and they slew Sheshai, and Iman, and Talmai. And from thence he went against the inhabitants of Debir, and the name of Debir before was Kirjath Sepher. You know that, right? Okay, anyway. Verse 17. So they're mopping up. Judah went with Simeon his brother, verse 17. And they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath, and utterly destroyed it. And the name of the city was called Hormah. And also Judah took Gaza with the coast thereof, and Ascalon with the coast thereof, and Ekron with the coast or the border thereof. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. So that was going to be a later project if they stayed faithful. And they gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and he expelled thence the 3 sons of Anak. So Judah and Simeon obeyed Joshua, and they mopped up after the combined army of Israel had been disbanded after the 5 years of war of conquest of the promised land. Joshua's strategy had been to take the highlands first, where the enemy's chariots could not be deployed. Then they were to take the valleys piecemeal. So those 2 tribes complied and defeated most of the Canaanites who occupied their territory. But most of the other tribes did not comply. Judges chapter 1, verse 21. And the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem. But the Jebusites, they dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day. However, Benjamin did not obey, they chickened out. Verse 22, the house of Joseph, they also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them, so they obeyed. And the house of Joseph sent to descry, or reconnoiter, to spy out Bethel. Now the same of the city before was Luz. And the spies saw a man come forth out of the city, and they said to him, Show us, we pray thee, the entrance into the city, and we will show you mercy. And he showed them the entrance into the city. They smote the city with the edge of the sword, but they let that man go and all his family. And the man went into the land of Hittites and built a city, and called the name thereof Luz, like the old one, which is the name thereof unto this day. So Ephraim did obey what Joshua said. They took Bethel, but the half-tribe of Manasseh, which is on the west side of the Jordan, chickened out, like verse 27 says. Neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and her towns, nor Tanakh and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Ibleam and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns. But the Canaanites would dwell in that land. And it came to pass, when Israel was strong, that they put the Canaanites to tribute, and did not utterly drive them out. Well, that's not what Moses commanded. Neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer. They made it into an old folks' home, right? No, but anyway, the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. That's in the plain by the Mediterranean. Neither did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Nahalal. But the Canaanites dwelt among them, and became tributaries. Neither did Asher, the tribe of Asher, drive out the inhabitants of Akko, nor the inhabitants of Zidon, nor of Ahalab, nor of Achzib, nor of Helbah, nor of Aphik, nor of Rehob. But the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Neither did the tribe of Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth-Shemesh, nor the inhabitants of Beth-Anath, but he dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth-Shemesh and Beth-Hanah became tributaries unto them. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan, the tribe of Dan, into the mountain, for they would not allow them to come down into the valley. Now, Dan totally wimped out. Dan didn't even make them tributaries. But the Amorites will dwell in the Mount Heres and Ajalon and Shaalbim, yet the hand of the house of Joseph prevailed. So Joseph did what Dan should have done to the Amorites, so that they became tributaries. Verse 36, and the coast of the Amorites, the border, was from the going up of Akrabim from the rock and upward. All the greatness that they had experienced under Moses and Joshua, and after experiencing all the divine miracles, after all that, Israel disobeyed and stumbled, and now would face the consequences that Moses warned of. Chapter 2, verse 1. And an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and said, I made you go up out of Egypt, and I brought you into the land which I sware to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. You shall throw down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare unto you. And it came to pass, when the angel of the Lord spoke these words unto all the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voice and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim, the weepers. They sacrificed there unto the Lord. Now, this sets the stage for the book of Judges. The inhabitants that they refused to drive out would be impediments to them, and their idolatrous practices would ensnare them and lead to their downfall. Do you remember the repeated theme of Deuteronomy? How Moses utilized every method he could to impress upon the people the prohibition of worshiping other gods. The true God had all but come out of the clouds and revealed himself to them. They'd witnessed fantastic miracles over and over for many years. They'd even been fed and watered by divine provision, not once or twice, but continuously. They'd fought battles against powerful foes, and the finger of God had given them decisive advantage. He even weaponized earth and sky for them. Yet, how had the mighty fallen? They had turned away from their guardian. They had failed to give God the place in their lives that he deserved, and now they would experience the consequences. Their faces were plastered on the walls of every post office in hell. To the adversary, they were public enemy number one, and the adversary was itching to get even. And when they let their guard down, like a true bully and grudge holder that he is, he attacked. Chapter 2, verse 6. And when Joshua had let the people go, the children of Israel went every man unto his own inheritance to possess the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the mount of Ephraim, on the north side of the hill Gosh. And all of that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. Verse 11, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam. Now, how could that have happened? Well, obviously, the parents didn't do a good enough job of transferring their faith to their children. God was the same God who had made them invincible. What had changed? The people. They were the ones who had changed. Verse 12, and they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, of the gods of the people that were around about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And they forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtoreth. Duh! They did the number one bozo no that Moses repeatedly warned them of. The power of God's a wondrous thing. The knowledge of God is profound and exciting. To reject that said something about them. Did they care about the things of God as much as they should have? Did they put something ahead of him? What can we learn from that? Now, I'm not implying that we all should become monks, because we're not all spirit yet. We have spouses to love and become one with. We have families to love and to raise right. We have property to steward properly and to profit from. Those are all important. But how should our commitment to the things of God balance with those things? Well, Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, right? But do we break our other commitments to commit to God? Now, of course, we can't serve both God and mammon, but that means we can't love both. Remember, Jesus said, make friends of the mammon. Not love it, make friends, all right? If we're faithful in the unrighteous mammon, if we're faithful in that which is least, then we'll likely be faithful in the greater if we have our priorities right. So put God first, and he will help with those other things. Put those other things first, and they will dwindle away. Chapter 2, verse 14. The anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about. That's that Hebrew idiom of permission, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had said, and the Lord had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, the Lord raised them up judges, which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. And yet they wouldn't hearken unto their judges, but they went whoring after other gods, and bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of the Lord, but they did not do so. And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of that judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings, by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, in following other gods to serve them and to bow down unto them. And they ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. Wow. So, this now is the formula for the next centuries. They quickly fell into idolatry and were conquered and abused by their enemies. They would suffer until they came to their senses, and then they would repent and cry out to God for aid. And then a judge would rise up and believe God to deliver them, and God was with that judge to deliver them from their oppressors. That judge became the leader of the theocracy, their form of government, and they would be free during the life of that judge. But when the judge died, if a new one did not rise up to replace them, they quickly fell back into their old ways, and the whole cycle started all over again. The people had become preoccupied with something else than job number one, which was the promise. Remember, the Christ line was to come through them. They had to be a people to protect it, and that people needed a land to sustain them. They needed to be as relentless as the adversary's pressure and attack, because he hated them and wanted to wipe them out to get to the Christ line. Verse 20. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, because this people hath transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened to my voice, I also will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations which Joshua left when he died, that through them I might prove Israel, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk therein, as the fathers did keep it, or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua. So this is the cycle that Ren told us about in his session on chronology. Back and forth between servitude and freedom, weakness and strength, depending upon if they obeyed God or not. Chapter 3, verse 1. So, this is the book of Judges. Now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel had not known the wars of Canaan. Verse 3, namely, the 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites, and the Sidonians and Hivites that dwelt in the Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon unto the entering in of Hamath. And they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they were like termites. And they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. Oh, that's exactly what Moses warned them not to do. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served Baal in the groves. Therefore the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. And then they finally came to their senses. I mean, they were the ones that crossed the Red Sea. They're the ones that God fed every day with the manna. They were the ones that saw the pillar of cloud every day and the pillar of fire every night. They were the ones that crossed the Jordan when it ran dry. They were the ones that circled Jericho 7 times and shouted, and the wall fell flat. And here they're taken over by Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. Well, verse 9, and when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised up a deliverer to the children of Israel, who delivered them, even Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel, and went out to war. And the Lord delivered Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed against Cushan-Rishathaim. I wonder, was his nickname Cushy? Anyway, and the land had rest 40 years, and Othniel the son of Kenaz died. Now, here in verse 10 is another example of that phrase, the Spirit of the Lord. Now, without doing a phrase study, one would never guess that phrase carries with it the connotation of an adeptness in leadership. But when you do a phrase study of that, the Spirit of the Lord implies an adeptness in leadership. And what was the result in verse 10? It says, he judged Israel. See how they go together? Verse 12, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord after that. And the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And he gathered under him the children of Ammon and Amalek, and went and did smote Israel, and possessed the city of palm trees. So the children of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. So, the cycle yo-yos back the other way. When will they learn? See, Ren gave us that list in his chronology study, and it yo-yos back and forth. He solved for that period of time that the elders overlived Joshua. That he said it was 52 years. Then right after that is when Cushan-Rishathaim oppressed them for 8 years. Then goes back the other way. That was one of the 8 years were the Lo-Ami years. And then in Judges 3:11, Othniel judges them for 40 years. Then right after Othniel died, they went back to their old ways. They got oppressed again by the Moabites, 18 years. Those were Lo-Ami years again. And then in Judges 3:30, Ehud and Shamgar rise up, and together they judge Israel for 80 years. But then it yo-yos back again, and in Judges 4:3, they get oppressed again by Canaan and Jabin and Sisera, his general, for 20 years, 20 more Lo-Ammi years. And then Barak and the prophetess Deborah deliver them. And so they judged Israel for 40 years, and then they yo-yoed back again. In Judges 6:1, the Midianites oppressed them for 7 years. Those are 7 more Lo-Ammi years. Then after that, it goes back the other way, just back and forth and back and forth. Gideon for 40 years. And then after him, one of Gideon's sons killed the rest of his brothers, and Abimelech, the usurper, ruled for 3 years. And even though he was of Israel, those were 3 years of hell, and they were counted as Lo-Ammi years. And then Judges 10:2, Tola and Jair, one after each other, judged Israel for 23 and 22 years, respectively. So there was a succession, just like with Ehud and Shamgar. But then the Philistines oppressed them, and the Ammonites for 18 years, Lo-Ammi years. Then after that, in Judges 12:7, Jephthah judged for 6 years, and then Ibzan, another judge for 7 years, and then Elon, another judge for 10 years, and then another judge, Abdon, for 8 years. Well, they're starting to get some momentum going, but then they went back again. And in Judges 13:1, they did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and Philistines took over for 40 years. And those were Lo-Ammi years. And then finally, Samson judged them for 20 years. And after that came Eli for 40 years. And then Ren gave us the X for how long Samuel judged. And I believe that was 20. So that's from Ren's work on Judges, which, by the way, I believe is more accurate than the work that I did on Judges in 1977. I did not realize how important the Lo-Ammi concept was back then. All right? So I think his work is more accurate. There are 7 periods of oppression, Lo-Ammi years, not my people years. And there are 7 periods when the judges ruled. So then in your personal study, you can read Judges now and structure it around that chronology. But I'm going to hit on some of the high points now. There are some things in the book of Judges that I would like to cover that need some further explanation. So let's go to chapter 3, verse 15. So when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised them up a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gera, a Benjamite, a man left-handed. You know, most people are right-handed. I don't know what the percentage is, but he was left-handed. And by him the children of Israel sent a present to Eglon, king of Moab. But Ehud made him a dagger which had 2 edges of a cubit length, like 18 inches long. And he did gird it under his raiment upon his right thigh. Now see, most men back then were right-handed, so if they wanted to gird a sword, they'd put it on their left leg. So since he was left-handed and they didn't realize that, his sword was in an odd place. They didn't suspect it to be there. So, and he brought the present to Eglon of Moab, and Eglon was a very fat man. And when he had made an end to offer the present, he sent the people away to bear the present, but he himself turned again from the quarries that were by Gilgal, and he said, I have a secret errand unto thee, O king. Who said, keep silence. Shh. And all that stood by him went out from him. He wanted to know what the secret was. And Ehud came unto him, and he was sitting in a summer parlor, which he had for himself alone. And Ehud said, I have a message from God unto you. And he arose out of his seat. And Ehud put forth his left hand and took the dagger from his right thigh and thrust it into his belly. Woo! And the haft also went in after the blade, because he was a very fat man. And the fat closed upon the blade, and he couldn't pull the dagger out of his belly. And then the dirt came out. You know what that means. And Ehud went forth through the porch and shut the doors of the parlor upon him and locked them. And when he was gone out, the servants came. And when they saw that, behold, the doors of the parlor were locked. And they said, surely he covers his feet in his summer chamber. In other words, he's going to the bathroom. And verse 25, they tarried there till they were ashamed. And behold, he opened not the door of the parlor. Therefore they took a key and opened them. And behold, their Lord was fallen down dead upon the earth. And Ehud escaped while they tarried and passed beyond the quarries and escaped unto Sararath. And it came to pass, when he was come, he blew a trumpet in the mountain of Ephraim. And the children of Israel went down with him from the mount, and he before them. See, now you have to remember that they didn't have standing armies. These were just regular men and farmers and husbands and fathers, and they weren't trained in war or battle. So sometimes they'd be pretty skittish. They would be pretty superstitious. But when something like this happened, then the whole enemy side would be downcast, and the good side, our side, they would be emboldened. So that's what happened. And he said to them, verse 28, follow after me, for the Lord hath delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. And they went down after him and took the fords of Jordan toward Moab, and suffered not a man to pass over. So they took the crossing of the Jordan River that was between the Promised Land and Moab. Remember, Moab was on the east side of the Jordan River. And so all these men of Moab that were in Israel to oppress Israel, when they heard that the king had died, all right, they were coming back home. They were retreating. And so the Israelites took the fords across the Jordan River where they could wade across. And so they killed every man of Moab that tried to go across. See? They had left their homes and farms in Moab and crossed over the Jordan to subdue it. And it says they were all men of valor. In other words, they fought like soldiers. All right? They were just common men, but they would fight like soldiers. And they escaped not a man. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. But after that, they succumbed to the Canaanites, and Jabin was the king of the Canaanites, and Sisera was his general. And so when the people finally wised up, God raised up Barak, and he was encouraged by Deborah, a prophetess. And so Judges chapter 4 contains the famous account of how Jabin's general, Sisera, was done in by a woman. Look at chapter 4, verse 15. So the Lord discomfited Sisera and all his chariots and all his host with the edge of the sword before Barak. I think there's a clue in the Song of Deborah about how he did that. And he did it with rain. The ground was so muddy the chariots couldn't operate. So Sisera lit down off of his chariot and fled away on his feet. Now, that is something you don't do if you got a chariot. If you got a tank, do you get out of your tank and run away? No, you use your tank. See? So the chariot was useless. Verse 16. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host unto Harosheth of the Gentiles. And all the hosts of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. Howbeit, Sisera fled away on his feet to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera, and said to him, Turn in, my lord, turn in to me, fear not. I'll protect you. Come into the tent. And when he had turned in unto her into the tent, she covered him with a mantle. Now, here we have some elements of culture we need to explain. The tent did not have a threshold, so there was no threshold covenant with the tent. But this was an alternate way of signifying a similar thing, that the protection of the house would be upon him. So she covered him with a mantle. That was one kind of ceremonial way of saying, you're safe here. Verse 19. And he said unto her, give me, I pray thee, a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. But she didn't give him water. She opened a bottle of milk and gave him the drink and covered him. Now, she didn't take it out of the refrigerator. They didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have ice boxes. The only way they could preserve something like this was with salt, like buttermilk. And so she gave him to drink. She gave him a covenant of salt. That's what's hidden in the language there. And covered him. She covered him again. That's another guarantee. All right? Verse 20. And he said to her, stand in the door of the tent, and it shall be, when any man doth come and inquire of thee, and say, is there any man here, that you shall say no. So then, beyond the two guarantees that she had given him of protection, he even insists, you got to tell him this. So, he had her word that she would say that no one was there. Verse 21. Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a nail, a tent stake of the tent, and took a hammer in her hand, and went softly unto him when he was asleep, and smote the tent stake into his temples and his head, fastened it to the ground, put it right through his head, for he was fast asleep and buried. So he died. I guess you would after that. Verse 22. And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him, and said to him, come, and I will show you the man whom you seek. And when he came into her tent, behold, Sisera lay dead, and the tent stake was in his head, through his temples. Now, wait a minute. She had promised him she would protect him. She put the mantle over him. She gave him a covenant of salt. He even made her promise to say what he wanted her to say. And then she kills him? Well, why wasn't she worthy of death of violating the salt covenant or violating the covenant of the house? Because Sisera had violated it first. The clue in verse 22 is when he came into her tent. See, the tents back then had a dividing line in the middle of them, and part of the tent was the woman's side, and no man was supposed to go in there. That was her sanctuary. And he did the unforgivable. He went into her side of the tent. Men were not allowed in there. And by doing that, he betrayed his trust in her, in the other three covenants. He said, I don't believe you. I don't believe the first covenant. I don't believe the covenant of salt. I don't believe that you'll be true to your word. And he went into her side of the tent. That's what that said. That was such a gross violation of culture. He broke all those covenants and called her a liar by going into her side of the tent. So she was compelled to kill him, even though he was an ally, because breaking the salt covenant alone is worthy of death, and he did far worse. Do you understand? Chapter 6, verse 11. We have the Song of Deborah in there that you can look at. It's beautiful. Then chapter 6, verse 11. There came an angel of the Lord and sat under an oak, which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abiezrite. And his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And see, this is what happened. After Deborah and Barak judged Israel, they went back again, and they got oppressed by the Midianites. And so now, chapter 6, verse 11 is where Gideon now comes on the scene. And so, verse 11, an angel comes to him, all right? And Gideon is threshing wheat in the winepress, not by the winepress, in the winepress, to hide it from the Midianites. Now, normally, when you thresh wheat, you throw up the grain into the air, and the wind blows the chaff. You winnow the wheat that way. And they have a threshing floor that is a community property, that in the community that they share it between all the farmers, and everyone takes their turns using that facility to winnow their wheat when the wind is right. Okay, but that's out in the middle of everywhere, and people can see what you're doing. And the Midianites, what they had done is they stole all the produce from the children of Israel. All right? So if anybody saw anyone winnowing wheat, the Midianites would come in and take it. So Gideon is winnowing his wheat, but he's doing it in the winepress, because the winepress is not just a flat stone. It's got the stone in it, but then it has sides, so you can't see what's going on inside. All right? So, he was threshing his wheat in there to hide it. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, Gideon, you mighty man of valor." In other words, Gideon, you're a fighter. Well, Gideon was the only one that was doing anything. He was the best that God had. Everybody else was scared and not doing anything. And here we're going to see how God took a third stringer and made him first string. In my One Body class and Energized Ministries class and Growing in God's Power classes, and in my book, Leadership in the Body of Christ, I show that in Romans 12, 6 through 8, the phrase, quote, according to the proportion of believing, unquote, that phrase goes all the way through, affecting all the ministries. And also, in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 15, it documents that one's extent, the extent of one's ministry, can grow by believing, by their believing and their people's believing. So, by God, it doesn't matter how you start, it matters how you finish. The key is responding to need. One's spiritual heart and one's seat of compassion should unite in the face of need and prompt us to rise up. And that is what Judges 2 said, that every judge did. They arose. Just like Moses did in Exodus 2:16. In that first use of the word arise, he arose and helped. That's also the first use of the word help or save. And that is what every judge does too. They save. They helped. They delivered God's people. Well, you want to help God's people? Then arise. The sky is the limit. Here, God found someone, Gideon, who was not quaking in fear. He was doing something, albeit something seemingly insignificant, but he was doing something. And that is all God needs. For from that small spark, he's going to build Gideon into a mighty man of valor. Look at verse 13. And Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us, and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites." And the Lord looked upon him and said, "Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent thee?" And he said unto him, "O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least of my father's house." He's third string. And the Lord said to him, "Surely I will be with you, and you shall smite the Midianites as if they were one man." Wow. Now, what's supposed to happen here is Gideon was supposed to say, "Okay, I believe. What do you want me to do?" But Israel had sunk so low that Gideon was the best God could get. He was the least family in Manasseh and the least in his house. So God had to work with him to build his believing. But he'll do that. He started up with that small spark, and he showed him a sign. Do we need signs today? No. But back then, they saw
and believed. We believe, then see. So, you want to see a sign? Well, speak in tongues. That's a sign. You want to see another sign? I'll show you a sign. It's 8-sided, and it's red, and it says, stop. Stop giving in to the adversary. All right? I'll show you another sign. It's green and round, and it lights up. It says, go. Let's rise up and go forth and speak God's word. Chapter 6, verse 17. He said to them, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me a sign that thou talkest with me. Depart not hence, I pray thee, until I come unto thee and bring forth my present and set it before thee. He's talking to the angel. And he said, I will tarry until you come again. So Gideon went in, made ready a kid of sacrifice, and leavened cakes as of an ephah of flour, and flesh he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, brought it out unto him under the oak, and presented it to the angel. And the angel of God said to him, take the flesh and the unleavened cakes, lay them upon the rock, pour out the broth. And he did so. And the angel of the Lord put forth the end of his staff that was in his hand, and touched the flesh and the unleavened cakes. And there rose up a fire out of the rock, and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes. Then the angel of the Lord disappeared out of his sight. Verse 22. And when Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord, Gideon said, oh, alas, O Lord God, for because I've seen an angel of the Lord face to face. Verse 23. And the Lord said to him, without the angel, peace be unto thee, fear not, for thou shalt not die. Well, how did the Lord say that after the angel left? Well, Gideon now had the Spirit upon him. See, the first encounter was via something in concretion, an angel. Then Gideon believed, and so God put his Spirit upon him. See, he installed a phone so he could call. He has Spirit. Same thing happened with Moses. So, verse 24, Gideon built an altar there to the Lord, called it Jehovah Shalom. Unto this day it is yet in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. So now, Gideon takes action. And the first thing he did was something worthy of death. He broke down the idol to Baal. And that even got him a nickname. They called him Jerubbaal. Baal was pleading, oh, please, don't break me down, I beg you, please. That was his nickname, Jerubbaal. Verse 33, then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together, and they went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him. And wow, this guy's taking a stand. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also was gathered after him. And he sent messengers to Asher, the tribe of Asher, to Zebulun, to Naphtali. They came up to meet him. And Gideon said unto God, if you will save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said, behold, I will put a fleece of wool in the floor. And if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon all the earth beside, then I'll know that thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as you said. So he still needs help to believe. All right. Verse 38. And it was so, for he rose up early on the morrow and thrust the fleece together and wringed out the dew of the fleece, a bowl full of water. Wow, a whole bunch. And Gideon said to God, oh, let not my anger be hot against me. I'll speak but just this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but just this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry upon only the fleece, and let it be wet upon all the ground. So God did so that night, and for it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew upon all the ground. Well, we don't need signs anymore, just to obey the word, all right? If we look for them now, we might get fleeced. The adversary can produce signs too. We believe first, and then act, and then we'll see all kinds of genuine stuff if we do it that way. So, chapter 7, verse 1, then Jerubbaal, who's Gideon, and all the people that were with him, rose up early and pitched beside the well of Herod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people that are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand has saved me. What? God, are you nuts? Now therefore go and proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is afraid, fearful, let him return, depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned to the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down under the water. I'll try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. Well, God, are you crazy? There's lots of Midianites out there. But Gideon obeyed. He brought them down, the people, to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, every one that laps of the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, him shalt thou set by himself. And every one that bows down upon his knees to drink will be in the other group. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But the rest of the men bowed down upon their knees to drink water. Well, those 300, they were smart fellows. They were vigilant. No one's going to be able to sneak up on them while they're drinking, right? And the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go. What? Yep. So the people took the vitals in their hands, their food and all that, and their trumpets, their horns, okay? And he sent all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent. And he retained those 300 men. The host of Midian was beneath them in the valley. It came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, arise, get thee down into the host, for I've delivered it into your hand. But if you're afraid to go down, go with Purah, your servant, your bodyguard, down to the host. So this is like counting coup, like among the American Indians, because historically any blow against the enemy of the Indians counted, but the most prestigious acts of bravery and courage included touching an enemy warrior and escaping unharmed without harming them, except, of course, for their pride. That would show great bravery going into their camp. Imagine that. This once timid man, Gideon, who needed all those signs, who was unsure if God was really speaking to him, had changed into a mighty man of valor. What did that? Believing God. And he went down into the enemy camp at night. God said in verse 11, you're going to hear him say something, and afterward your hands will be strengthened to go down under the host. So he went down with Purah, his servant, the bodyguard, outside the armed men that were in the host. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of these were along in the valley like grasshoppers for a multitude. And their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for a multitude. And Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream to his fellow, and said, behold, I dreamed a dream. And lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came to a tent, and smote it, that the tent fell and overturned it, and the tent lay along. That's a crazy dream. And the fellow answered and said, this is nothing save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the hosts. So what would you think if you heard that? Woohoo! And it was so when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned unto the host of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. What would you do if you heard that? Wow. Well, we hear something like that every time we hear manifestations. Woo! Verse 16. And he divided the 300 men into the 3 companies, and he put trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers, and said to them, look on me, and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall you do. When I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then you blow with the trumpet. also on every side of all the camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 300 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, about midnight. And they had but newly set the watch. And they blew the trumpets, and they broke the pitchers that were in their hands. So now the torches are glowing in the dark. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers and held the lamps in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands to blow with. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And the people of Midian thought they were in an ambush. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp. And all the host, the Midianites, ran and cried and fled. And the 300 men blew the trumpets. And the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow in the dark, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Bethshittah and Zarephath, and to the border of Amel Moholah, even unto Tabah. So anyway, what happened is, then all of the people that the rest of the host that Gideon told to go home, they rise up, they attack, they clean house, and so they're delivered from the Midianites. And so then, chapter 8, verse 22, the men of Israel said to Gideon, you rule over us, both you and your son son's son also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. And thus was Midian defeated, and Israel had rest. Well, let's rest too. Let's take a break. All right? Take a break. Bless you.